I spent everything and started from zero. What I learned about money. I'm standing in front of an ATM at 3 in the morning, and my card just got declined. Not for the first time, that week. Not even for the second time. I'm trying to withdraw $20, 20 measly dollars, and the machine is telling me I have insufficient funds. 6 months ago, I had more money in my account than most people see in 5 years. 6 months ago, I was the guy everyone came to when they needed financial advice. Now, I'm the guy who can't buy groceries. And here's the thing that kept me awake that entire night, the thing that made my hands shake as I walked back to my car in the dark. I did this to myself. Every single decision that led me here, I made with complete confidence. I thought I knew everything about money. I thought I had it all figured out. I was so spectacularly, devastatingly wrong that it almost feels like a different person made those choices. But it wasn't. It was me. And what I learned in the months that followed, what I discovered in the absolute wreckage of my financial life, changed everything I thought I understood about wealth, about security, about what money actually means. This isn't a story about getting rich quick. This isn't a story with a neat, satisfying ending where I made it all back, and then some. This is about the moment everything I believed shattered, and what I found in the pieces. Let me take you back to where it started, because the beginning never looks like the beginning when you're living it. I was 28 years old, working in tech sales, pulling in about $160,000 a year between base and commission. Not millionaire money, but solid. Really solid. More than my parents ever made, more than I ever thought I'd see at that age. I had this one-bedroom apartment in a nice part of town. I drove a car that was only 2 years old, and my 401k was growing at a pace that made me feel genuinely smart every time I checked it. I wasn't lavish. I want to be clear about that because this isn't a story about someone who bought a yacht and a dozen designer watches. I was what everyone would call responsible. I had an emergency fund, I had investments, I read financial blogs and listened to podcasts about wealth building. I was doing everything right, or so I thought. The first crack in the foundation came from a place I never expected. Opportunity. A friend from college, someone I trusted completely, came to me with an investment opportunity. He'd been working on this startup for 2 years, he said. They were about to close a Series A round with some major investors. He couldn't give me details because of NDAs, but if I got in now, before the round closed, I could get in at the ground floor valuation. The returns he was projecting, the numbers he showed me on his laptop over drinks one Thursday night, they made my head spin. I want you to understand something about that moment, about the way greed works. Because I wasn't a greedy person, I didn't think of myself that way. I thought of myself as ambitious, as smart enough to recognize opportunity when it presented itself. But greed doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up wearing a sign. It shows up disguised as intelligence, as being ahead of the curve, as not wanting to be the sucker who missed out. My friend showed me projections that suggested a $10,000 investment could turn into $60,000 or $70,000 in 18 months. Maybe more if things went really well. And the thing is, I had $10,000. I had more than that, actually. My emergency fund had grown to about $15,000, and I had another $20,000 in a regular investment account. The rational part of my brain, the part that had read all those articles about diversification and risk management, that part was saying to be careful. But there was this other voice, louder, more insistent. It was saying that safe money grows slowly. It was saying that people who get ahead are the ones who take calculated risks. It was saying that my friend wouldn't steer me wrong, that he had inside information, that this was as close to a sure thing as you could get. I invested $10,000. Then when nothing bad happened immediately, when the weeks went by and I didn't lose everything, I invested another 10. Then another 5. Before I understood what I was doing, I had put $35,000 into this company. Most of my liquid savings, most of my safety net. For about 4 months, I felt like a genius. My friend would send me updates, screenshots of meetings with investors, photos from the office they'd just leased in a trendy part of downtown. The company was growing. Things were happening. I started calculating in my head what my share would be worth when they went public, when the acquisition happened, when all of this potential turned into actual money. I told a few people about it, casually. The way you mention something you're proud of without wanting to seem like you're bragging. I suggested they might want to get in too, if they had the capital. Some did. That makes what happened next even harder to carry, knowing I brought other people into it. The updates from my friends started getting less frequent. First every week, then every 2 weeks, then just when I reached out to ask. The tone changed too. Things were taking longer than expected. The investors were asking for more due diligence. There were regulatory hurdles, all completely normal, he assured me. All part of the process. If you've ever had that feeling in your gut, that sick twist that tells you something is deeply wrong before your brain is ready to accept it, you know what I felt every time I read those messages. But I pushed it down. I had $35,000 in this thing. I couldn't afford for it to be a disaster, so I decided it wasn't. That's what we do, isn't it? We make reality negotiate with our needs. The company folded on a Tuesday. I found out not from my friend, not from any official communication, but from a news article someone posted in a group chat. The startup had burned through its initial capital, the Series A had fallen through, and the founders were shutting it down. There would be no returns. There would be no liquidation of assets that might return even a fraction of what we'd put in. It was just gone. $35,000, evaporated like it had never existed. I called my friend immediately. He didn't answer. I called again. And again. On the 4th try, he sent me a text that said he was sorry, that he'd lost money too, that he'd really believed in it. That was it. That was all I got. No explanation, no plan, no acknowledgement of what he'd convinced me to do. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at my bank account on my phone, doing math that didn't add up no matter how many times I recalculated. My emergency fund was gone. My investment buffer was gone. I had about $4,000 in checking and whatever was in my 401k that I couldn't touch without massive penalties. $4,000 in a city where my rent alone was $2,000 a month. You want to know what the worst part was? It wasn't the money itself. It was the realization that I had done this to me. Not the market, not some unavoidable disaster, not bad luck. Me, my choices, my ego, my absolute certainty that I was smarter than I actually was. If you're watching this, and you've felt that kind of financial fear, that pit in your stomach that opens up when you realize you've made a mistake you can't undo, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because what I'm about to tell you next, the decisions I made in the following weeks, they're going to sound insane. And maybe they were. But they made sense to me in that moment, and understanding why is the entire point of this story. I need you to stay with me through the uncomfortable parts, through the parts where you're going to want to yell at the screen. Because the lessons aren't in the smart decisions. They're in the catastrophically stupid ones. So, subscribe, because this gets worse before it gets better, and you're going to want to see where it goes. I promise you that. The first thing I did, the very first decision I made after losing $35,000, was to try to make it back quickly. I can see some of you nodding right now because you already know where this leads. You've read the articles, watched the documentaries, heard the warnings. But knowing intellectually that you shouldn't chase losses, and actually stopping yourself in the moment, those are two completely different things. I started gambling. Not at a casino, nothing that obvious. I started day trading. I opened an account with one of those apps that makes it easy, that gamifies the whole experience with confetti animations when you make a trade. I put $3,000 of my remaining $4,000 into it, leaving myself with $1,000 in checking with rent due in 2 weeks. The logic seemed airtight at the time. I'd done research. I'd watched YouTube videos about technical analysis and chart patterns. I'd read posts from people who claimed to make thousands a day from their phones. I thought if I could just turn that 3,000 into 6, then 12, I could rebuild what I'd lost. I could get back to stable ground before anyone had to know how badly I'd screwed up. I made my first trade on a Wednesday morning before work. A tech stock that I'd seen mentioned in several forums. Something about an earnings report that was going to beat expectations. I put in $1,500 and watched the stock price for the entire day. Refreshing the app every few minutes during meetings, during lunch, during a presentation I was supposed to be paying attention to. The stock went up. Not a lot, maybe 3%, but up. I sold and made about $45. $45 minus fees. It felt like proof. Proof that I could do this, that I understood how it worked, that my earlier loss had just been bad luck with a bad investment. This was different. This was me in control. Over the next 2 weeks, I made about 30 trades. Some went up, some went down, but I was mostly breaking even, maybe slightly ahead. The problem was the time it was consuming. I was waking up before the market opened to set up my positions. I was checking prices constantly throughout the day. I was staying up late reading analyses and predictions, trying to find the edge that would give me the big win I needed. My work performance started to slip. I missed a sales call because I was too focused on a position that was dropping. I forgot to follow up with a client who'd expressed interest in a major deal. My manager pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay at home, if I was dealing with something, because I seemed distracted. I lied and said I was fine. Then came the day that changed everything. I'd been watching a biotech stock that was waiting for FDA approval on a drug. The forums I'd been following were convinced it was going to get approved, that the stock was going to double, maybe triple when the announcement came. I did what no rational person should ever do. I put everything I had left into it. All of the money in my trading account, plus another $500 I scraped together from what was left in checking. About $3,500 total, on a single stock, on a binary outcome. The FDA rejected the drug. The stock didn't just drop, it collapsed. It lost 70% of its value in a single day. I watched it happen in real time, sitting in my car during my lunch break, unable to look away as the number got smaller and smaller and smaller. I kept thinking there would be a rebound, that it would recover, that I just needed to hold on. But it didn't recover. It kept falling. When I finally sold, when I accepted that it wasn't going to come back, I had about $800 left. $800 from the $3,500 I'd put in. $800 total to my name with rent due in 5 days. I didn't go back to work that afternoon. I called in sick and drove around the city for hours, not going anywhere in particular, just driving. I kept replaying every decision, every moment where I could have stopped, where I could have chosen differently. The apartment, the car, the life I'd built. It was all about to come apart, and there was no one to blame but myself. That night, sitting in my apartment in the dark, because I was too paralyzed to even turn on the lights, I had to make the call I'd been avoiding. I called my parents. I told them I needed help. I told them everything. My father didn't yell. I think part of me wanted him to, wanted the anger and disappointment I felt I deserved. Instead, he was quiet for a long time after I finished explaining. Then he asked me a question I didn't expect. "Do you know why you did this?" I started to answer, started to talk about the investment and the opportunity and the bad luck, but he cut me off. "No," he said. "I mean really. Why did you need to make the money back so fast? Why couldn't you just accept the loss and rebuild slowly?" I didn't have an answer, or I didn't have one I was ready to say out loud. The truth was that accepting the loss meant accepting that I'd been wrong, that I'd been foolish, that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. It meant living with the shame of it, letting it be real. And I would have done anything, risked anything to avoid feeling that. My parents loaned me $3,000 to cover rent and expenses while I figured things out. They made it clear it was a loan, not a gift. They made it clear they loved me, but that they weren't going to enable me to keep making the same mistakes. I had to sell my car within the week. The payment was too high, the insurance too expensive. I downgraded to a 15-year-old sedan I bought for cash off Craigslist. It made a weird rattling sound whenever I went over 40 miles per hour, and the air conditioning didn't work, but it ran. Then I had to look at the apartment. $2,000 a month for a one-bedroom in a nice neighborhood. It was impossible now. Unsustainable. I broke my lease, paid the penalty with money I borrowed from my brother, and moved into a studio in a part of town I'd never even driven through before. The rent was $900 a month. The building smelled like cigarettes and old cooking oil, and I could hear every conversation my neighbors had through the walls. But it was what I could afford. My co-workers noticed. Of course they noticed. You can't go from driving a nice car to driving a beater, from living in a good part of town to vanishing after work every day without people asking questions. I made up a story about helping family, about temporary circumstances. Some people believed it, some didn't. I stopped going out for drinks after work, stopped joining the team lunches, stopped participating in the social fabric of the office because every event cost money I didn't have. I became invisible. The guy who shows up, does his work and leaves, nothing more. For about 6 weeks I lived the most minimal existence you can imagine. I ate rice and beans and eggs. I cut my own hair in the bathroom mirror. I walked instead of driving whenever possible to save on gas. Every single dollar was accounted for, stretched as far as it could possibly go. And here's where the story takes the turn that I didn't expect. The part that genuinely changed how I think about everything. One night, sitting in that cramped studio apartment, eating rice for the 4th day in a row, I realized something. I was okay, not happy, not comfortable, not where I wanted to be, but okay. The catastrophe I'd been so terrified of, the disaster that had driven me to make increasingly desperate decisions, it had happened. I'd lost everything. I was living in the worst circumstances I'd experienced since college. And I was surviving. The shame was still there. The regret was still there. But the fear, that acute panic that had controlled every choice I'd made for months, it was fading. Because the worst-case scenario wasn't theoretical anymore, it was my actual life. And I was handling it. I started to notice things I'd been too stressed to see before. The bodega owner downstairs who always threw in an extra piece of fruit when I bought groceries. The neighbor who left her Wi-Fi unsecured so I didn't have to pay for internet. The library branch, 3 blocks away where I could sit in air conditioning and read for hours without anyone bothering me. Small kindnesses, small graces. Things that don't show up in a bank account, but matter anyway. I also started to notice something about money itself, about the way I'd been thinking about it my entire adult life. I'd treated money like a scorecard, like a measure of my worth as a person. More money meant I was winning, meant I was smart, meant I was doing life correctly. Less money meant failure, meant stupidity, meant I should be ashamed. But sitting in that studio apartment with almost nothing, I realized that money had never been the thing I actually wanted. What I'd wanted was security, respect, freedom from worry, the feeling that I was going to be okay no matter what happened. And the irony, the thing that made me laugh out loud in that empty room, was that I'd destroyed all of those things chasing money. I'd made myself maximally insecure, wrecked my self-respect, and created more worry than I'd ever experienced, all because I was so desperate to have more money. I'd confused the symbol for the thing itself. Money isn't security. It can buy you some buffer against certain kinds of problems, sure. But I'd had money and felt terrified. Now I had almost nothing and was starting to feel something like peace. That realization didn't fix everything. It didn't put money back in my account or undo my mistakes, but it shifted something fundamental in how I approached the next phase. I made a decision. I was going to build back slowly, deliberately, without any shortcuts. No investments I didn't completely understand. No get-rich schemes. No trying to make up for lost time. Just steady, boring, unglamorous accumulation. I opened a new savings account at a different bank. Every paycheck, I put 10% into it before I paid any other bills. It wasn't much at first, a couple $100 a month, but I watched it grow with a kind of satisfaction I'd never felt when I had thousands sitting in an account before. Because this time, I knew what it represented. It represented discipline. It represented learning from mistakes instead of repeating them. 3 months in, I had about $1,500 saved, then my car broke down. The transmission went, and the repair estimate was $1,200. Old me, the me from before all of this, would have panicked, would have put it on a credit card or taken out a loan or found some way to avoid touching the savings. New me looked at that $1,500 and understood what it was for. This was the emergency. This was exactly why the money existed. I paid for the repair, dropped my savings back down to $300, and started over. No drama, no crisis, just dealing with what needed to be dealt with. That experience taught me something crucial that I'd never understood before. Emergency funds aren't about never touching them. They're about having options when something goes wrong. They're about not being forced into bad decisions because you're desperate. I'd had an emergency fund before I lost everything, but I'd never had to use it for an actual emergency. I'd used it for an investment opportunity, which meant when a real emergency came, I had nothing. The function of the money had gotten twisted in my mind. Over the next year, I lived in that studio apartment and drove that rattling car and ate a lot of rice and beans. I got my savings back up to $5,000, then $10,000, then the amount I'd lost in the original investment, $35,000. The day I hit that number, I sat and looked at my bank account for a long time. I'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, like I'd erased the mistake. But I didn't. Because this $35,000 wasn't the same as the $35,000 I'd lost. That money had been built on ego and luck and a job that I took for granted. This money was built on a year of discipline and sacrifice and genuine learning. They weren't equivalent, not even close. Around this time, I started talking more openly about what had happened to me. Not bragging, not dramatizing, just being honest when people asked about money or investments or financial decisions. I was stunned by how many people told me similar stories. The friend who'd lost $20,000 in cryptocurrency, the coworker who'd gotten buried in credit card debt trying to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford, the cousin who'd had to move back in with her parents at 32 after a business venture failed. Everyone had a disaster story. Everyone had made mistakes that felt uniquely stupid and shameful. And everyone had been hiding it, just like I had, because we've created this culture where financial struggle is treated like moral failure, where admitting you don't have it all figured out feels like admitting you're less than. I started to see my whole journey differently, not as a story of individual failure, but as a symptom of something bigger. We're sold this narrative that wealth is the result of intelligence and hard work, which means poverty must be the result of stupidity and laziness. But that's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. Smart people make catastrophically bad financial decisions all the time. Hardworking people struggle to get ahead. The system is designed in a way that makes it easy to fall and hard to climb. I'm not saying this to absolve myself of responsibility. I made choices. Bad choices. Choices I knew were risky even as I was making them. But I'm also saying that those choices were made in a context, in an environment that constantly tells you that if you're not getting richer, you're falling behind. That if you're not taking risks, you're being foolish. That there's some secret that wealthy people know that you haven't figured out yet. It's exhausting, and it makes you vulnerable to exactly the kind of mistakes I made. Here's what I learned about money that I wish someone had told me before I lost everything. Money is a tool, not a goal. The purpose of having money is to reduce stress and increase options, not to prove something about yourself. If your financial decisions are making you more stressed and giving you fewer real options, you're doing it wrong. It doesn't matter how good the potential returns are. Second lesson. There is no such thing as a sure thing. None. Zero. If someone is promising you returns that seem too good to be true, they are too good to be true. Every single time. No exceptions. The people who got rich on Bitcoin or startups or real estate or whatever the current thing is, they got lucky. Some of them were also smart and hardworking, sure. But mostly they got lucky. And for every person who got lucky, there are thousands who made the same bets and lost everything. Third lesson. Rebuilding is slower than destroying, always. I lost $35,000 in about 4 months. It took me over a year to make it back, and that was with focused effort and sacrifice. There is no fast way to recover from financial disaster that doesn't involve more risk, which means potentially more disaster. You have to accept the slow path. You have to accept that you're going to be uncomfortable for a while. Fourth lesson. Your relationship with money is emotional, not rational. You can read all the books and listen to all the podcasts and know intellectually what you should do, but until you understand the emotional drives that make you spend or save or invest or gamble, you're going to keep making the same mistakes. For me, it was ego. It was the need to feel smart, to feel like I was ahead of everyone else. Once I identified that, once I could see it operating in my thoughts, I could start to counter it. Fifth lesson, and this is the one that took me the longest to accept. You are not your bank account. Your worth as a person has nothing to do with your net worth. Nothing. I know we live in a world that treats wealth as a moral virtue, but it's not. It's just a circumstance. Some circumstances you can control, some you can't. Either way, it doesn't define you. Block 19. So where am I now? I still live pretty simply. I moved out of that studio apartment eventually, but I didn't go back to the expensive neighborhood. I'm in a modest one-bedroom in a normal part of town. I still drive an old car, though I upgraded from the one that rattled. I could afford more at this point. My income recovered, even improved. But I don't want more. Or more accurately, I don't need more. The things I actually value, the things that make my life feel good, they don't cost much. Time with friends, long walks, reading, cooking. Working on projects I care about. I have an emergency fund that could cover 6 months of expenses. I contribute to my 401k. I have a small amount in index funds that I don't look at more than once a quarter. I will never day trade again. I will never invest in something I don't completely understand. I will never put myself in a position where one bad decision could destroy my stability. Some people might see that as overly cautious. They might say I'm leaving money on the table, that I'm not maximizing my potential returns. They're probably right. And I don't care, even a little bit, because I sleep at night now. I don't wake up at 3 in the morning in a panic, checking my phone to see if some investment has collapsed. I don't feel that constant low-level anxiety about money that I lived with for years without even recognizing it. The friend who got me into that first investment, the one that started this whole cascade, I ran into him about a year ago. We hadn't spoken since the company folded. It was awkward at first, but we ended up getting coffee, talking for a couple hours. He told me he'd gone through something similar, that after that startup fell apart, he'd chased losses in cryptocurrency and lost even more. He'd filed for bankruptcy. He was rebuilding now too, slowly, working a job he was overqualified for, living with roommates in his mid-30s. We talked about how ashamed we'd both felt, how isolated, how we'd each thought we were the only ones stupid enough to fall for it. And sitting there, comparing disasters, I realized something. The shame was the most expensive part. Not the money I lost, but the years I spent hiding what happened, pretending I was fine, isolating myself from people who might have helped, or at least understood. The shame kept me sick longer than the actual financial damage did. So I'm telling you this story, putting it out there in detail, because someone needs to hear it. Someone watching this right now has made a financial mistake they think is unforgivable. Someone is drowning in debt, or regret, or fear, and thinks they're alone in it. You're not alone. You're not uniquely stupid. You're not beyond help. You just made some bad decisions in a system that's designed to punish mistakes harshly and reward luck generously. Here's what you do. First, stop. Whatever you're doing to try to fix it quickly, stop. You can't rush recovery. You can only deepen the hole. Second, get honest. Tell someone you trust what's happening. Ask for help if you need it. The shame thrives in secrecy. Third, make a plan that's boring and slow and sustainable. Pay down debt, build savings, cut expenses. It's not exciting. It's not going to make you feel like a genius, but it works. And fourth, forgive yourself. You're going to be okay. Maybe not today, maybe not this month, but eventually. I'm living proof of that. I went from having nothing, from standing at that ATM at 3 in the morning with a declined card, to having stability and peace and a life I actually enjoy. Not because I found some secret or got lucky or figured out a shortcut. Just because I kept going. Just because I learned what money is actually for and stopped trying to make it be something it's not. So do me a favor. If this story resonated with you, if you've been there or you're there now, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Tell me what you learned from your own financial disaster, or tell me I'm completely wrong about everything. Either way, I want to hear it, because the only way we get through this stuff is by talking about it, by being honest about how hard it is and how often we screw it up. Money is complicated. Life is complicated. But we don't have to figure it out alone. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.